Hello, everyone, and welcome to the e-commerce news update for July. Pleasure. This is our third one now, and I am very lucky to join you from the land of the Turrbal people here in Brisbane. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, wherever we come to you from. We hope that you are doing the same on the land that you're on. If you have not been to an e-commerce update before, it's a pretty simple concept. I have the pleasure of inviting one of the industry's best minds in with us to have a conversation around the news and the articles that have made an impact and will have an impact on your business from the last month. Stuff that you need to get across with facts, but also a lot of opinion on what this might mean for e-commerce businesses in Australia. It's pretty relaxed and it's informative. And I hope that if you can join us in the live stream, come in and join us, because it's always better when we have more people joining that can add to the conversation and maybe even call BS on what we might be talking about occasionally. That's always good fun. So we will be having more of these regularly. So please come along and join us. But if you are joining us on the recording, it is all here for you. Josiah, welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. We are very lucky today to be joined by the great man who is Luke James. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks, Nathan. Pleasure to be here.
It is great to have you here. I'm very much looking forward to this. Now, Luke, we know you as the founder of ExpertFit, but you have a long and illustrious e-commerce career before that, especially in the shipping and the logistics industry. Can you give us an overview? I think it's really important for everyone to know what you are doing today, but also a little bit of a background on your career and the perspective you're coming from.
Sure. And I think to help explain what I'm doing today, it's actually talking about what happened earlier in my career. And I started life pick packing in a warehouse back in, we won't talk about what year it was, but it was a long time ago. You can probably make some fair guesses by the state of my receding hairline and the amount of grey in my beard. I've seen the birth of e-commerce in Australia, and it's been absolutely outstanding. I started from a supply chain logistics perspective, picking and packing in the back of a DHL warehouse back before we were delivering direct to homes. And since then, I've been along a very fascinating journey. My first experience with direct to consumer was with Avon, where I was running their operations for Australia and New Zealand.
Really?
If you think about the concept of direct to consumer, mine's direct to a consumer who's delivering to a consumer. Very high emotion when you're supporting a lot of small businesses who are relying on your capability to deliver on time and in full. So that's where I really learned what happens when you deliver something wrong. Fun time.
That's part of your career that I didn't even know about that one.
It's one of those things where I can say that I was with Avon when they were still in existence in Australia. At the moment, they're being fulfilled from globally into Australia. So it's a very different beast to what it used to be. But from there, I was headhunted by the team at Rocket Internet to come in and help launch the iconic Zanui, HelloFresh, and a few other brands which have since become deactivated, and probably most commonly known for introducing the 3-hour delivery service with the iconic. So in terms of breaking supply chain logistics and retail in this space, I've definitely had a little bit of a hand in it. So it's been a formative journey. I've also spent time with Temple & Webster in their early days, helping them set up their supply chain logistics as well. So I've been very much focused on that delivery to end consumer and creating that experience. From there, I've also spent some time with eBay, helping to build out their fulfillment solution for Southeast Asia, which is now across the globe. And then went into Toll to try and battle against Australia Post, as many carriers have tried to do over time. And interestingly, still a thing that happens today, and the part of the business I was involved with is now Team Global Express, led by Christine Holgate. They're still trying to solve the same problems, and that is providing a true competitor to Australia Post, so that there's alternatives in the market that make sense for consumers, really. So that was a 4 years.
Quick question on that before we get into the news. Do you think they've got a chance of taking on Australia Post?
I think the challenges that they face are still very similar to what they have been, and that is that the cost base and the infrastructure is so hard to set up and compete against Australia Post. It does take material investment, and not saying that Team Global Express won't make that investment, but it's something that's very hard to see a payback on, which is part of the reason why it's a challenge. Now, do they provide a great premium option? They've got more planes in the air than what Australia Post does in more areas. And that's a really interesting fact that not a lot of people are aware of, but it doesn't really sustain a lot for fairly high volume locations like Sydney and Melbourne. But fast forward I've spent some time with Booze Bud, helping run their supply chain. Then I spent a couple of years with a Woolworths business called National Products Fulfillment, which was fulfillment for e-commerce. And then luckily for me, I finally decided that it was time to pick up and start to build my own thing, which is ExpertFit. So thank you for touching on that, Bushy. And just to give you an idea of what ExpertFit is, we are Australia's first and largest advisory and consultancy made up of fractional executives and former business owners. So we have 40 plus people who are award-winning, 25-year plus tenured executives. Excuse me. We call them experts. And what they bring with them is a lot of lived experience that you don't normally find in consultancies or available on the market. And the genesis of this actually comes around from something we'll talk about a little bit later, which is online retailer. So an online retailer last year, a lot of our good acquaintances, friends and colleagues who've been there for quite some time, they had a consistent issue, which was they would reach a certain amount of scale and then they couldn't quite get over that hump. You know, they kind of stagnated. They built things like advisory boards and then they'd realize that, hey, what we need is we actually need a hard hitter to come in and really take our business to the next level. And so they start thinking about what's the right executive to hire. And what they look for is, of course, a seasoned executive who's done these things. And surprisingly, and not really that surprisingly, they can't afford to pay the salaries that those people can get in market. And so they're then left with having juniors who are coming up, and not saying that we haven't got some brilliant people who have done that and stepped into that void, but it does leave some risk there. Yep. So what I saw was an opportunity to be able to take my network, so people such as Bushy, who have joined my network as well, and really empower people to connect from that network into these smaller businesses. The concept is simple. We get in there, we help to resolve problems, and because we have lived experience, not just consulting expertise, we know what not to do. And that's the more interesting part than what to do. So we can make introductions. We have a massive network. So we have 42 experts with an average of 26.7 years experience. So we're not talking about people who haven't been around the block. We're talking about people who have seen and done a lot. Broad range. We have actually, I think, 3 or 4 people from the top 50 in e-commerce. So we've actually got some quite interesting people in the mix. We have former CEOs of businesses such as within the Metcash group. We have entrepreneurs who have built, launched and sold their own businesses. We have people who have launched Shopify and Peloton in Australia. We have people who run incubators and also act as entrepreneur in residence. When you think about the firepower that we can bring to someone, we take pretty much any kind of skill set that you need and give it to you in tiny little chunks that you can afford. And that's the key difference in our business. So you can get someone to come in, provide some firepower for you and help turn things around rather quickly.
I love it. And I've loved being part of it so far, because just being amongst those people as one of the experts, and the expert isn't a term that sits well with me, but I totally understand why you've put it out there. Being in the room or a call with those people, I'm like, as a sole operator too, it's like, oh my God, I'm just continually learning from that vast range of experience in there. I love what you pulled together, mate, and no doubt there's a lot of exciting projects on the cards. Like you said, I just think there's this huge gap. That it is good timing. There's so many people going out on their own that have that 20, 30 years experience and now going, who wants it? And a lot of retailers out there that, especially after COVID, have that big gap between senior executive managers and junior teams. Like they kind of cut that middle layer, and now they've got a lot of people, big gaps in specialist areas where they could use people like yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, I agree with you. I find it hard to sit with the term expert as well, even, helping to develop and evolve the business. But you sit in a meeting with these people and you just ask a random question that will float past your mind, and the responses you get are absolutely incredible. They're outstanding. And I think the other part that, we're hearing a lot of is macroeconomically, everyone's very challenged at the moment. And the one thing we don't want people to do is to, take their foot off the pedal and cut costs to a point where, they're not doing their marketing, or they're not doing their sales activity to generate new customers. They're not acquiring, or they're not building. And if they need someone who can come in and kick that along from a strategy level, then realistically it's about investing your money in the right spot. And rather than going to market and putting it out there as a job ad, just get someone in who's going to give you what you need and, do that in a guaranteed way. with some incredible experience. And not to mention, almost 150,000 business contacts in Australia and New Zealand between everyone on the network.
That's
so
insane.
we can tap into a lot of people.
I love it. All right. Yeah. Luke, we have got your LinkedIn URL in the chat here. So if you want to connect with Luke, that's a great way to do it. ExpertFit.com.
Expert-fit.com.
Beautiful. And we'll put all that in the notes as well in case you want to pick that up with Luke. All right, let's get into our articles. I can see that we've got a few people in the live session. Josiah, James, welcome. If you have any opinions, extra things that you want to add, let me know. Hopefully you can unmute your microphone and chime in. I'm happy for you to do that. If not, comment into the chat because we'll be watching it. Let's get into it, Luke. I'm going to kick off with the first of my 3 articles, and it is the NAB Online Retail Sales Index. So this is like a little gospel for me, and I always look at it, and I'm going to share it. Look, it's good because it's consistent over time. It gives the same stats over a long period. The downside is that it does lag a fair bit. This is obviously for May 2024 that they've just released, and we are now in July. So the world has changed a little bit. But why this month is important is because we saw a fairly big drop-off in growth in May 2024. I'm just going to blow this part up because you can ignore the guff a little bit. But this is the change year on year. And you can see here, as we're coming up into May, we've had fairly steady growth year on year, even though it has been tough. I don't think anyone says that it hasn't been tough, but this is the first time that we've actually had year on year come off. And then if we go change month on month, we can see that the growth month on month from April, which was still a relatively good month, has actually gone backwards since last month. So to me, that's the first time, like, it's not the first time it's happened. We've gone backwards a couple of times here and over here as well. We've had a few little dips along the way, but to me, this is kind of one of those, it really depends what happens in June now to see whether a lot of this fear is coming to fruition, because I think a lot of us have been sitting around waiting to go, there's a lot of trepidation out there, a lot of fear, but not seeing it in the numbers yet. How do you feel about that, Luke?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a couple of interesting points there. What stands out to me from this reporting is not only is it a drop-off in May, but it's also the overall industry size is contracting as a proportion of total retail sales. And so we're not seeing that the total retail sales is growing and the share is shrinking. It's actually all shrinking. And that really talks to what's happening in the cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment. I think that there's a few interesting things, and there's a couple of things I'll touch on. Is we'll hear repeatedly that there's people like Temu and Shine coming into the country that are having a negative effect. But what we've also got to consider is that it's expected that most other economies across the globe are going to see a reduction in interest rate before Australia does. Now, that's interesting because people will invest in the country because our interest rates will stay higher, but you'll probably see an uptick in cross-border trade coming into the country. So I think that's going to be, I expect that's what's actually playing into this. And I think that we'll also start to see a further tail off locally. The next part for me is, local economy becomes really important. This is what this demonstrates. It's, how do you actually get back out there and be available in that market? Because you can see the retail number there is steady, right? It's quite flat.
So what do you?
Excuse me. It's quite flat
so
overall.
It's still growing 9% year on year here.
Yeah, it's still a good number, but it's not going in the same trajectory as what it has been. And so what I'm seeing in other communities as well is that people are looking to shop locally as well. And the fact that there's not as much money going into entertainment, so people aren't going out to theatre or movies as much. They go to the shops, and that's where I think we might see some of that tailing off coming.
Yes, really interesting. If we look at year on year, takeaway food, interesting, is still up year on year, but you can see the change year on year in, games and toys is a really tough category to be in at the moment, I think. Really tough. It's that discretionary, right?
Yeah, correct. And people sometimes look at consider takeaway food as discretionary, but when you consider that cost of living is challenging, people are spending more and more time doing overtime and working or in gig economy to try and build up their income. What happens is they're not home to cook, so takeaway food goes up.
And to be honest, takeaway food isn't always more expensive than cooking at home now, right?
No, it's very true.
So all categories had a slump. Apartment stores, which has had a stellar year over the last 12 months, come off slightly, but still, great growth there. And again, we saw this in all states. So there was no states that haven't been impacted by this. WA holding up a little bit better than the rest of the nation, but pretty even decline across there. To your point, Luke, I thought it was interesting in the same week that these NAB results were announced, Ipsos released some online traffic, retail traffic updates, and it nails your point. Temu flying up the ranks in terms of traffic. We obviously don't get the sales numbers, but a growth of 40% in online traffic over the last month in May. So I'd love to see the numbers for Temu, but obviously we can't. But 40% growth in traffic says that, yes, Australian retail is struggling because there is this international pressure coming in. That's never been hotter.
Yeah, correct. And I think the other part of that as well is that with all of that web traffic, it's telling us that, people aren't, their discretionary spend might be changing, but they're actually now not necessarily looking at, do I stop the discretionary spend? They're just looking about, do I put it somewhere that's more cost effective for me? Which is where obviously Temu will keep on. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've been harassed by it since buying off it once.
Yes.
But let me tell you, they're very friendly and their models are obviously built that way. But it provides a challenge for us in the market because at last, what we've had is a Chinese seller who understands how to market to us. And that's the big difference. Because I've heard many people say, for how long have we been able to get cheap stuff from China on eBay? And the answer is forever. But now they've found a way to market it to Westerners, and that's the biggest difference. And in Australia, we've caught it. We've gone, hey, we're in a cost of living crisis. This is appealing to me. If I give it a shot and it doesn't work, whatever, it's $9.
That's a really interesting point. And that was the research from Roy Morgan. I've referenced it a couple of times, but they were saying actually one of the biggest growth customers for Temu and Shein is the David Jones kind of customer, who you may not think as that, but it's exactly that point that you made, is that they can buy it and they go, oh, well, if it doesn't work, then it doesn't matter. Like, no loss, right?
Yeah, that's right. Which of course has a knock-on effect of sustainability and how do you actually deal with the product? I mean, my wife bought something from Temu, or a couple of things from Temu about a month ago, and something didn't work or wasn't the right size. And it's like, okay, what do I do with it? Here's your credit. Do with it what you want.
Yeah.
It's completely different. Reverse logistics is gone.
It kills me. But I did an order just before I went on holidays just to test it, and I'm going to write a little post about it. But delivery was late. But then I got all these incentives of, here's some cash back, here's this. They didn't stop throwing things at you because the delivery was late. I'm like, yeah, they know how to market. I think it's a really good point around they've cracked the marketing.
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think? Last question on this one before we move to your first article, Luke. What do you reckon that these figures for May from NAB? Do you predict that it will have any massive impact on Black Friday, Cyber Monday this year? I saw that with Prime Week coming up, the patent agency, who obviously specialize in Amazon, are still predicting over 100% growth for their customers on Amazon Prime Day. Do you think we're going to have a softer Black Friday, or do you foresee that it will go gangbusters again?
I actually think it's going to go gangbusters again. And the main reason why I say that is because it's exactly as we've been talking about. Temu has conditioned us to expect deals. And so when you look at the softening of what's happening at the moment, like I expect June's probably going to pick up because we've just gone through into financial year sales, right? Yeah. So because we're now conditioned to search for a discount, once you've got all of the click frenzy happening, you've got all of the Black Friday happening. Once that starts to roll, that's when we'll start to see people put their hands in their wallets. So my prediction is that I think Australia Post will again record a record high in terms of number of parcels that transact through. So I think we'll see the sales continue to go through the roof. But I also think that it'll be a lower average basket value on each of those parcels that travel through the network. That's what I'm kind of expecting will happen. So it'll be interesting from a reporting period once we head into January and we start to see some of that reporting come out for those listed retailers to see if that has been the case. But that's where I'm predicting it will go.
The pent-up spending is real. We've got a comment from James, and I think it is a good segue into your first article, Luke. So James says, good call out about Temu working out how to market to Western markets. But what about premium, higher priced products? Do you think they'll crack that? I think this is a good segue into your first article. So we might unveil that and then address James's question around premium products as well.
Great. And it is a great question, James, and Bushy is right. We'll actually probably touch on that a little bit. So one of the things that caught my eye in the last week has been Cettire starting to work out how to enter China's luxury goods market. Now, this is really quite interesting because we've just finished talking about Temu, who are coming into our market and stealing market share and having a good time of focusing on driving the budget-conscious shopper. And what we're seeing here is Cettire is they're going, well, actually, we're placing a bet which says if we push into the Chinese e-commerce market, we believe with our products that we can hit that luxury goods market, even though, as you can see in the headline here, rocky luxury goods market. What's it going to be like for a new entrant to go into that market? And when you have a look at what Cettire is actually expecting as a performance from this, they're actually expecting to see a growth in EBIT, which would be counterintuitive to entering into a new geography. So there's a lot of interesting things to unpack from this. And this is not to question, Cettire's product set or their quality or in any way, shape or form, but it's a super bold move to go and push back into the Chinese market. Now, I think it makes sense. It's logical. It's a large market. There is a very large sector of luxury goods purchasing. And we've seen that fluctuates based on what the Chinese government chooses to do. So, for example, once they've cut out premium wines coming from Australia, that's had a massive impact for us locally. So assuming that everything's going to go ahead and there's no real challenge from the local government, it'll be very interesting to see how this actually plays into it. And why do products from other countries coming into China from a luxury perspective work so well? There's an interesting question. It comes back to what James said. When you've got high sales of Louis Vuitton, Supreme, Dior, Cartier, you're talking about all of the brands zoom up the charts in China. How are they not producing these in high quality and then selling them into the rest of the market? What is it that actually stops them from doing that? So I think it's an interesting question that James has said when they're saying, and Cettire has obviously done their research and said, we believe we can enter that market and generate huge amount of sales and more EBIT from selling that product. Does it talk to China's inability to produce that high quality product really be seen as something produced there as being luxury?
So have I got the model right? I'm not 100% across Cettire. I've been more across a lot of the commentary around the business model rather than the offering itself. They're a marketplace essentially for luxury brands. They don't carry any stock?
I believe they carry some stock, but it's limited.
Okay.
So they do some first-hand fulfillment, but most of it is fulfilled by brand.
Yeah, okay. So the question is then, if they do get massive in China and they really start taking market share, does that make Cettire less appealing to luxury brands to be listed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And then what does that do for those luxury brands and their direct-to-consumer proposition in China or even direct-to-wholesale in China? It's a new entrant which could really shake things up. And there's a question about JD.com. There's a question about Alibaba. There's obviously different platforms which are working on the edges, on the periphery of this. But they're backing their brand to go and break that open and believe that by having all of these brands that are available in that marketplace, that they can start to take on everyone else, which I think is really interesting.
I think the big call out here with the story that we came up with first and the reference to Temu and Shein and then Cettire is that the most dangerous place to play, I think, at the moment is right in the middle.
Absolutely.
I'd rather be luxury or I'd rather be cheap and nasty, but I wouldn't want to be playing in the middle. And I think we'll kind of come to that in another story that we've got coming up a bit later. But
you're right. That's what it talks to. It's the when you think about most people who launch a brand or a product and they use Australia as a test market, typically it's for them to launch into the States, which is, a similar style of market. And they're aiming for something that's around that midpoint that is high quality, not over the top in price, so they can get market penetration, and not cheap and nasty, so they don't get written off against everyone else. So when you've got Cettire up here, you've got Temu down here. You talked about before the David Jones buyer now becoming a Temu shopper. There really isn't that middle ground. Like it's starting to disappear.
Yeah, and it was at the Masters Power to the Marketer event last year. They had a great demographer on there. I can't remember his name, but it was amazing. But he was like, it's okay if you are a premium retailer and you discount to try and pull people up, that's okay. Like you're trying to grab people to come up. But if you are, I've got that totally wrong. If you're discounting to try and bring high value customers down to you, that's fine. But if you're trying to appeal to lower markets to shop you by discounting, then you're in trouble because they're not going to re-shop with you. They're only going to shop with you when you're on special. So don't reach down, reach up and bring in.
Yeah, correct. And and that is part of the challenge that we saw with BoozBug as well, is that our shoppers were trained to buy on discount, and they would wait until there was a discount. And you'd have these amazing spikes, but obviously that had an impact on the product margin. So it's a risky game to play, but I think this is really bold. And I think the question is, if Cettire is doing this, is this a pathway for Australian businesses to try and grow? Now that sounds fraught with danger, much to the point, because we'll never be as cheap as what the local market is. So it's got to be luxury. And what brands can do that? We've seen UGG's gone in quite successfully and made a dent in their market. Right, so there's obviously niches that are there that work. What else is there? Like, is this really a channel that, rather than someone exporting their product or service to somewhere like the US, does China open up an opportunity for them?
Yeah, I love it. We're going to get onto the next article, but the beer example that you just gave there actually just made me think and go, actually, that challenges our middle, our low and our high of what's happening in the craft beer market at the moment. I know it's a very subsection of the alcohol market, but the trouble that they're having in craft beer at the moment, number of breweries going under and people not spending, $14 on a handcrafted beer, and the Great Northerns of the world having record sales, the middle market is actually working for beer. So kind of undoes my theory for that subsection.
Discerning beer drinkers have become less discerning as their wallets have shrunk.
Right. Exactly. All right, I am going to throw to my third story of the day, and it is Shopify's additions. So every 6 months, Shopify announces a whole new set of features that they release. They don't actually release them all at once. They kind of drip feed them, but they make the big announcement once every 6 months. So James, Josiah, I would love your thoughts on these as well, if you are in there using them. But really interesting one. Obviously, they call it Summer Edition because they're over in Canada. We get it in the middle of winter. So thank you for that, Shopify. But a couple of things that really stood out for me in terms of what they've announced. They've put a lot of, they've put a lot of effort into trying to customize the analytics dashboard, which I think says a lot more around what's happening with Google Analytics than it does with Shopify. We're seeing a lot of people relying more on Shopify now because it is just simpler to get those simple analytics than relying on GA, which takes a bit to get your head around. It's actually powerful, but so you can see Shopify doubling down there. Other thing that I saw, split shipping in checkout. Something that, Luke, you'd be like, yeah, of course, everyone's got to have split shipping in checkout. But being able to offer that natively for the first time is really interesting. I think it's also a call out to a lot of these point solution providers, these plugins that go, Shopify have no problem integrating your features into their core rollout if you get really popular, like the Amazon model. So I think that's interesting. Markets, they've kind of just made it easier now to pull all your markets, whether it's B2B, whether it's direct, whether it's POS, through different countries into one dashboard rather than having it spread out through the platform. And the other one that I wanted to call out was, they don't have it here, their new taxonomy. So they've basically released a whole new standardized product taxonomy that is fueled by AI to help you basically fit into Shopify's. They have it like over 1,000 product taxonomies now to make you fit into. And that's obviously to help them with their shop product to be able to categorize. Because I saw even this year they had their first shop event, shop sale event. So you can see that they're starting to become their own marketplace. And they, obviously, as we move into distributing into marketplaces and different territories, having them standardized across all shops will help Shopify do that also from an ad or a retail media platform as well. Anything from you on this drop, Luke?
Yep. So there's a couple of things that jumped out to me. First of all, how pretty is the presentation? Yes. It's really well done. Like, they should be commended for that. It's actually quite an engaging presentation. So when I went through this, a couple of things that I picked up. So the first one you touched on there was my favorite, was the taxonomy on products, because it does two things. The first one is it allows you to organically improve your SEO, because now you're going to have all of these listings which are generated for you, all these taxonomy details, which are going to help you become more searchable and more findable, which I think is incredible. So that's kind of like a free kick in SEO for a lot of brands. The other big one that jumped out at me was a bit more focus on wholesale and B2B, and bringing that up to speed as well, because the benefits around obviously having a B2B online channel are understated to say the least. But they've definitely focused on how do we actually make it more user-friendly for someone who's going to look to purchase from you. And so creating that platform now for wholesale. My wife has a small jewelry business, and selling wholesale for her is door knocking. Right? There's no other way to do it at the moment, right? Unless you go and list on Ali or try and get onto some of the other marketplaces, which are frankly challenging when you're a small business. But this then allows someone to discover your brand. They might discover us at a local market, and now they go, right, I actually want to sell these in my shop. This gives them a pathway to get there. So when you combine this with the channel management for the different stores, you can really see that Shopify is going, hey, we're trying to unify commerce for our customers.
Then you've had their efforts in POS on top of that, and they've kind of got wholesale, D2C, retail coming together nicely.
Yeah, correct. And there's also there's a bit of work in there which I picked up on the ship from store and the order and the checkout order splitting. I think those two things are super critical to be able to compete in the B2B space as well. So, in the direct-to-consumer space as well, because now you're not as restricted with your inventory. It gives you a much more native way to be able to handle your inventory in multiple locations and still fulfill your customer's order. And I think that's going to be incredibly powerful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Great call outs. I love that. I feel like everyone's been saying, they're getting there on B2B, they're going to get there, but this release is going, no, we're like, it's happening.
It looks really good from a B2B perspective. The other thing I'll put out there too is because they've now identified that B2B is a thing, they've actually focused on getting themes that suit it better. And I think that's really important. So when you look at some very good B2B e-commerce platforms at the moment, even just looking at that trade theme right there, that's it. Yep. That's what it needs to be. Clean, easy, straightforward. Just click a button and put it in my warehouse.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And James just mentioned that Shopify's acquisition of Peel Analytics is a clear sign on their focus of analytics as well, which is a great point. We didn't even talk about, it's funny, isn't it? Like before, give us 6 months ago, and we probably would have been frothing around this Shopify magic, right?
Yeah.
Because what it can do is pretty phenomenal. And it feels like we just now expect whenever Google have a day, whenever TikTok have a day, whenever Shopify, there's going to be AI in there. And it's like, yeah. And, the ability to edit images, especially on mobile, create new images within the platform. 12 months ago, we're like, holy shit, that would be amazing if we could do that. And now everyone's like, yeah, of course it's there.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting for me, right? I think the next step from this, and this is the interesting part of what James mentioned with Peel Analytics come in, is you create your own language model out of what you've built on your Shopify platform, and that's what it builds from. Yes. That'll be where it gets really interesting, I think. A bit more personalized.
I love it. And you don't have to do the training. It's already trained for you based on the history that's there.
Yeah, ideally you don't have to train it. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. All right, good one. All right, that is my second article for the month. Luke, I'm going to throw to you for your second.
So my next one that it's kind of been bubbling away in my head. It's rather less of a news article and more talking about what we're seeing in the market. So we've mentioned Temu and China already, but there's a sleeping giant in this space, which I think is really important for us to pay attention to. Now, if you've ever sourced anything, you've built something, you've sold something, there's a very good chance you know what Alibaba is. Now, Alibaba is a monumental business. It has more cash than most economies. All right, and this is something that can just turn around on a dime and really start to penetrate into different markets. And what I'm starting to consider here is coming back to the point where Temu's found a way to start to market and penetrate into at least Australia and definitely other Western cultures as well. Is how far away is Ali from doing the same thing? If you think about how long it's taken for someone like Amazon to get market saturation and become prominent, Alibaba is a very slow player. It will take its time. It will find a way to turn over more and more billions. And let's face it, there's not a lot that can stop them, much like there's not a lot that can stop Amazon. And so we're seeing a North American giant come and take over markets like the UK, like Japan, like Australia. They just roll out and they just keep on rolling. And they're being unchallenged at the moment. And in my opinion, the one that can challenge them is Alibaba. And AliExpress is a really interesting experience. It's not great, but it's kind of like Amazon. You know, it doesn't have to be great. It's just got loads of really cool shit, to be honest. I can't even begin to tell you how many advertisements I've had for buying an excavator or an inflatable spa, or like the stuff that they can source is brilliant, and it's an amazing way for all of these Chinese manufacturers to get on a global stage. How long before they go, hey, let's curate it a bit and create a marketplace where we can sell these direct to consumer? And so I'm I'm keeping an eye on Ali at the moment. I'm kind of expecting that they've got a plan that's going to come and hit us sooner or later. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on it, Bushy.
I love that. I to be honest with you, I haven't thought about Alibaba for the last few months. Like, it's all been Shein and Temu, right? So I love that you've resurfaced and like, don't forget about these guys. You know, they're a big player. They're not going to let it slide. So I absolutely brilliant point. Watched with interest this week with Amazon announcing that they're going to start offering a ship from factory offering on their site. So to me, it's very similar to that. Amazon have always been around bringing goods into local fulfillment centers and then shipping out for speed and convenience. Now to go, actually, no, we need to play the price game and be able to go up against Shein and Temu. Like, Shein and Temu aren't like emerging anymore. They're competitors. Yeah. And so for Amazon to realize that and literally change their whole proposition for that offering, away from that convenience and loyalty into, we're just competing on price, no name, no brand, we're going to get it to you. It might take longer, but it'll be cheap, is pretty big, I think. So I think you're spot on the money that Alibaba are going to do the same.
Well, I can't see them staying dormant. Why would they? How do they choose their battleground, though, is the interesting part. Is it Australia because it's easy? Where access to Australia is easy. It's a smaller market. You can test things. You can, really blow up the market by doing a couple of small activities. Or is it somewhere that's, heavily discount focused? Is it in Indonesia or is it a Singapore? Is it somewhere in Asia that's a little bit more accessible for them? That's a good question. Or do they want to go and take Amazon on in their homeland?
Well, the only question I've got around that strategy is, who's Alibaba's, from an e-commerce perspective, and I know they service a lot more than e-commerce, who's their customer now? Because there's not many, especially in D2C world, retailers who can get by on bringing in cheap product, putting a sticker on it, and then reselling it. You know what I mean? It's almost the Dollar Shave Club model won't exist.
Yeah, correct. Although it's an interesting, here's the paradigm, right?
Yeah.
Your customer for Alibaba at the moment is the artisan who's putting things together to stock up their store because their handmade stuff is so expensive and so hard to make, but they want to generate sales and start to get people, wearing their scarves if they're not going to buy their jackets, right? Yes. Or I think that's where the customer is. So it's kind of this really interesting space where everyone wants artisanal. They want handcrafted, they want hand stitched, they want all these things, but trying to find the the right thing for the right price is very hard, and that's where I can see that something like Ali has a play in there as well and continuing to supply that market. Will they compete against them? Probably. Why not? There's plenty of resellers here who purchase from Ali and then resell the product in their stores.
True. Comment from Dave: even if they appear in market with Amazon and Shein, they will compete with themselves. Nothing changes, in my opinion, here in Oz. The brand and story is the only way to compete. Can't compete on choice or price. Bit of a different opinion out there.
I actually think it's a very good call out, David, because what you're saying is that if the proposition from Ali is mainly focused on selection and price, I agree with you. We're saturated with the players who are in the market. The choice question, they may actually look to penetrate a market in which Timo and Shein don't play, which is in larger products. So if you think about things like brown goods or small electronics, excavators, any lines for your breweries that are going out of business, that may be one way for them to penetrate the market and generate the capital that they need. And then it's as people start to get used to them on a B2B perspective, does that give them a footprint for B2C? I don't know. But it's one of those things where I can't help but think there at some point has to be a decision made by Ali as to whether they're going to do it or not. And I don't know if that decision's been made. But I sit back and I see this sleeping giant and I'm like, just waiting. I think there's going to be something that will happen. I know that, JD's made a push previously, but did they have enough firepower to make it work? Don't know. There's a few questions to unpack there. But I think it's a good call out on the overall retail environment that it's not going to materially shift because we've already got this saturation from the likes of Temu.
Great point. Thank you for bringing Alibaba back on the radar. The only addition that I had to that before we move on is that I saw this week as well, or last week, that Alibaba are exiting data centers in Australia and New Zealand. Australia and India. So I obviously not across that too much detail, but interesting to see them they're pulling back on the tech side, but they've obviously got something up their sleeve. All right, let's move on. My last story for this week, and I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't touch on it. And I actually love that we have you here, Luke, because you've worked alongside some similar era brands. It's the voluntary administration of Booktopia and to a lesser extent Bellabox. I don't think it's any surprise for anyone to see Booktopia reach this point after the last couple of months. It seems to have happened pretty suddenly, trying to take the last 6 months, but over the last few months, it's been pretty inevitable. Pretty sad to see that, Australia's biggest bookstore going into voluntary administration.
Yeah, it's somewhat devastating, right? It's because, as you said, these are retailers from, the era of when I was entering e-commerce and who have, you look at what Tony's built, Tony Nash's built over such a long period of time. And the story is super compelling, right? The story of Booktopia is super compelling. We want to compete against and be better than Amazon. We're going to be faster. We're going to be better. We're going to do all these things. The interesting part is that, the Booktopia model from early on was very much about availability and speed of delivery because you didn't have to get it from overseas and wait to God knows how long before a book turns up on your door. You can get it in a couple of days and you knew it was going to arrive from a local retailer. So, when you look at that and where we are in the retail environment today, books is hard because what you're talking about is a massive SKU range, right? And we've talked about that. There's plenty of conversation in the media about their warehousing as well and how they actually manage to get things out the door quite quickly. They leaned into the fact, let's get things delivered. They leaned into bringing those ravioli packaging into market. They leaned into automation in their DCs. They were one of the first that really did it. And if you look at where we've kind of got to today, we're now in a market where I know that when I'm searching for a book online, Booktopia is not going to be in probably the 5 cheapest. And when you're talking about a commodity product, which you can find available in a Big W or a Kmart store, and they'll deliver it to you usually just as fast, you've then got to ask yourself, why am I spending more to buy it from Booktopia? And so their model of waiting for things to settle down and then selling out a longer tail gives them a really distinct SKU disadvantage because they've got so many different products. And I think that's part of the challenge they had logistically as well. So it is sad to see. I hope that the story of Booktopia is not over because it's definitely been a bit of a darling of the industry for a while. But I think, they made a big bet on their logistics infrastructure, which was, I think brave, without having known their books beforehand. I think it was very brave for them to do that. They put their flag in the sand and said, right, we're going to be brilliant at logistics. So we need to reinvest. The market shifted underneath them, I feel.
What I think is interesting, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because the ads are driving me nuts. I think it's interesting now because Booktopia were very much that pioneer, will do things, will build things. Like I remember having lots of conversations with Wayne, the CTO, as they were building this, and he was very much a hands-on CTO. I'd be at conferences and he'd be sitting next to me on, coding things away on their website and stuff. I'm like, what are you doing out here, CTO? And he's like, yeah, I've just got to code this and get it. And I'm wondering now that they're in receivership, so everything from their custom warehousing options through to that long tail of inventory through to a custom web platform, does that help or hinder someone taking it on?
Yeah. And I think, there's an interesting thing to answer here. If they were so good at logistics and they've got all this logistics infrastructure in place, there's probably a very good chance that they could flip that into a 3PL model, right, and provide that for other people. The question is, have they over-engineered it too much towards their own needs? And coming to your point, is a software going to support doing that by introducing others? So from that perspective, I suspect that if it's not and I'm not close enough to know the answer, but if their order management platform or their warehouse management platform is customized too much, it'll be very hard for them to do that. And I think that will be the question. If I was an investor or, looking to bail them out, I'd be looking at what's reusable, what's resellable, how can I segment it? Do you take the going interest without the assets and have a fire sale? Like there's a lot of different things to answer there. But yeah, it's a good point. What can you reuse? And it talks to something actually, which I would like to touch on for anyone who's a startup founder. Building your own thing distinct from everything else is not always going to be the answer.
Yeah.
Think about your technology stack really, really just in infinite detail.
Yeah. Yep, you got a supporter there with Dave. Dave saying it was originally all about logistics. Taking this business on would be a warehouse at best, but again, there's no brand story anymore, no community, no value in content, etc. Database at best. And I think that's a really interesting point too, because I know that Booktopia doubled down on their club. You know what I mean? They were trying to do the club thing about 18 months ago, where you pay an X subscription model, but I just don't think books are that regular enough of a purchase for that model to work on a single product.
And in reality, the biggest repeat purchases of books are going to be university students.
Yes.
Looking for textbooks, and how many of them are looking to buy a premium brand new at top value? That's a question, right? The market's just not there at the moment.
Yeah. Last question for you, Luke, on this before we move into your last topic is, we had that glut. Well, there's that group of companies that are publicly listed. A lot of them did it during that COVID time, had Adore Beauty. We've got Temple & Webster, Hogan. All of those are, I wouldn't say in trouble by any means, but they're not shooting out the lights at the moment. They're turning over. They're slightly profitable. The only kind of exception maybe Step One, who seems to have recovered a hell of a lot. Do you see that, you've worked with BoozBud, eBay, Temple & Webster, The Iconic, a lot of those foundation brands, e-commerce brands in Australia. Do you see that there's a life cycle there where you almost have to reinvent yourself because they're starting to kind of group together, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that there's, you have to think about why did they raise capital in the first place by listing? And what are they intending to do with that capital? Now, was that simply a buyout for the founders for them to, go and retire? I mean, all power to them. Let's not discount that. And they worked hard to build those brands. My question is that if you're a business of a certain size where listing is going to be attractive for people to invest in you, and you're going to generate all of that cash, then you should be doing something with that cash. And it should be as dramatic as transforming yourself. Now, maybe not a full transformation. Maybe it's a pivot. Maybe it's accepting that you've saturated this channel and now you need to go and look at either a different market or a different product set. I think that's really what I'd be looking for as an investor, which is going to drive the share price probably a bit lower at first, but give some confidence that we're moving forward and growing. So I think that, you're right in calling there's kind of that cluster. I'd say out of all of them, Temple & Webster's probably sitting the prettiest at the moment, and probably have the right model because it's multiple suppliers direct into consumers, so it's less risk from a capital perspective. But how do they take that and turn that into something new and innovative? And it's a great question. And I would be, as a shareholder, as a major shareholder, or as an analyst, I would be looking for, once I raise that capital, what's next? Do we have those clear questions from those brands, which we can now look at and say, hey, you said you were going to do this and you haven't. The last call out there is more credit to them for taking advantage of COVID boosted numbers and using that to move their listing up. I think it's a brilliant strategy. It's risky from an investor's perspective, but if you got to take advantage where you can. You got to strike while the iron's hot, and I think they've all done very well in that.
Yes, and I think that's the thing, is that there's real people behind all of this who have worked their asses off to not only build Booktopia and whatever else is there, but also change how we do e-commerce in Australia. So, the impact that they've had is much beyond the individual companies.
Absolutely.
Luke, last one you've got a special one for us to bring us home.
Well, a bit of a fun one, more so than getting into anything too serious, because I think we've touched on some big things in the last hour. But as we're coming into online retail, July is always the month of online retailer, and you see so many brands building their, the suppliers building their stands and coming up with crazy new ideas to activate when people are in the hall. And I think it's brilliant now that all of the stages are within the hall as well, because it keeps everyone into one spot rather than emptying out. So it's an always on now. It's always on, right? But it's a great time of year, and I think we all look forward to it because it's kind of our last big kick before we push into getting ready for the silly season. But the question that I pose is, online retailer is brilliant at recognizing people who've had outstanding impact on the industry, but predominantly it's from a retail perspective. And there's this amazing group of people behind the scenes who have done so much for the industry for so long. How do we recognize them? What's available to recognize those people? Now, I'm not talking about, like, Nora's done a great job of focusing on the vendor awards, Retail Fest as well. So Phil set up the vendors awards there as well. They're great, but they talk about the businesses. I'm more talking about the people, the innovators, the people who have changed the industry from the things that they have done. And some of the names that I dropped before, like, you have Alita from Milk Academy, who's, taught retailers how to love email again, and changed a lot of businesses from that perspective. And I'm just glossing over the many other things she does. So if she watches this, I promise I understand you do a lot more. You've got yourself, who's bringing the add to cart into market and talking about how all these e-commerce changes can affect people. You have people like Mark Mansour from eBay, who's now leading Woolies X. Right, and so you have all these brilliant people who have had massive impact. Lance Earhart from Dan Murphy's and then into Woolies X as well. How do we recognise these people the right way? And what can we do to bring that to the forefront? Because I think that these guys really should be known by most people in the industry.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And look, the vendor awards are fantastic, and hats off to both the industry awards for Retail Global and that. But at the end of the day, they are, God, Ash will hate me for saying this, but they're a marketing activity for the companies. Essentially, like, having judged them, like, the amount of effort and time that goes into those to win those awards is great. But how do you recognize the people who are literally on the ground helping clients? Like, I love the example you gave with Alita, helping people work through things and just live and breathe it. And yourself, you can put yourself on that as well for what you're doing, Luke, and what you have done in the past. And I think too, a lot of the things that people do in the background of being the people that people feel free to call up or just go, hey, I need to pick your brains on this. Those people are invaluable, especially to people coming through. And I think there's something there around not only recognizing them, but connecting them, because we're doing the skills stage at Online Retailer. And the whole idea about the skills stage that I'm working with the event organizers there is to help bring in the young talent to Online Retailer. Oldies like you and I, we've been there long enough to be able to go, 80% of the people that will walk through the door. But how do we get that next generation, the e-com coordinators, e-com managers to come through? And then potentially, is there a way to connect them with that experience? People like, your group that you've pulled together to kind of take what has been done and what's been learned and then innovate it and to kind of cycle it again.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And it's there's just such great people out there with amazing minds that realistically, when you hear about a success story or a case study with a retailer, there is someone in the background who's engineered that and built something to solve that problem. And it's just incredible that most of the changes we see in things like consumer experience actually comes from someone way back down the line who's gone, I'm going to build something which will solve that and then sell it to other people to sell it. Like, it's just, and it's not a cry for let's try and create something new, but it's, there's a lot of people in the background who have blood, sweat and tears helped engineer what our e-com industry looks like today, who really need to be recognised and brought together with the new breed as well.
Great call out. What's your plans for online retailer? Any big plans?
So one of my clients will be there, which is Velocity. It's a new mile delivery fulfillment, and I will be there with them. So I'll be buzzing around, and I've got a little interesting thing. So if you see me running around with a box with your name on it, that's what we call fulfillment by humans. And then I got my dinner jacket for the evening event, and must say it is spectacular. I might have even outdone last year.
Oh, you always bring the good jackets.
I try to.
Look, we have to end it there. We've actually got an online retailer little meetup on campus next week. If anyone is around, come and join us, because we're going to talk through what we might be able to do as like a little side thing. I know Hamish put in a question into the campus around, are we doing any side events? We're all going to get together, see, we might do a little side breakfast or a side dinner or something there with campus. But otherwise, I hope to see everyone there. James, thank you for joining us. David, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in here live. If you're seeing this recording, thank you for taking the time. We would love to hear more. Join us next month. And of course, our biggest thanks goes to you, Luke. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective.
Thanks, Andrew. Wish it to be great.
Pleasure. One last time, where can people find you and find ExpertFit?
You can find us at expert-fit.com or, of course, stalk me on LinkedIn.
I will be stalking. Don't worry about that. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, guys.